It was a typical Monday morning, and Raymond and Brenda, a couple deeply entrenched in their high-pressure careers, were already running late. Raymond, a finance executive, had an important meeting, while Brenda, a marketing manager, was rushing to pitch a major client. Their one-year-old son, Collins, was left in the capable hands of Little Steps Daycare, or so they believed. Collins, a curious and energetic toddler, was the light of their lives, but their demanding schedules often left them depending on others to care for him. On this particular morning, both parents assumed the other would handle picking him up later. Neither paused to confirm. The daycare was unusually quiet that afternoon. Most of the toddlers were napping, their small forms sprawled out on colorful mats scattered across the room. Miss Grace, the daycare attendant, leaned against the doorway, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. Her voice was low, conspiratorial. "Noah, I told you I'd sort it out," she said, barely noticing the faint sounds of tiny hands tapping against the doorframe behind her. It was Collins, his wide eyes brimming with curiosity as he crawled away from his mat, drawn toward the partially open door. The toddler had always been adventurous, his little legs always moving, eager to explore the world around him. Miss Grace was too engrossed in her conversation to notice. "Do you love me or not?" she asked sharply, her voice rising with frustration. She stepped outside to avoid waking the other children, leaving the door ajar. The humid Lagos air swept in, ruffling the papers on her desk and creating the perfect opportunity for Collins' escape. With surprising determination for his small size, Collins crawled out of the playroom, his soft giggles masked by the chatter of a nearby street vendor selling roasted plantains. The daycare's gate, usually latched, stood slightly open, a carelessness Miss Grace had ignored earlier in the day. Beyond the gate lay a bustling main road, alive with the sound of revving engines and the occasional shouts of hawkers. Collins, undeterred by the commotion, continued his journey. He paused briefly at the edge of the daycare compound, his tiny fingers gripping the rough cement of the gatepost. His eyes sparkled with wonder as he watched cars zip by, their honking horns a strange melody to his young ears. To him, it was all a grand adventure. Just a few meters away, Ibrahim, a trailer driver with a sharp eye and years of experience navigating Lagos traffic, spotted something unusual in his peripheral vision. A small figure, too small, was moving toward the road. His heart jumped, but he couldn't stop immediately. His trailer, loaded with heavy cement bags, wouldn't come to a halt so easily. As Collins crawled closer to the edge of the road, the world seemed to move in slow motion. Pedestrians screamed, pointing at the baby on the asphalt. Ibrahim gritted his teeth, jerking the wheel sharply to the right to avoid the child. The trailer screeched, its tires leaving deep marks on the pavement. The sound of the massive vehicle swerving was deafening, and people rushed toward the scene, expecting the worst. "Jesus!" a woman shrieked, covering her face. Dust and debris filled the air as the trailer finally came to a halt. But when the crowd reached the spot where Collins had been, there was no trace of him. No body, no blood, nothing. The baby had vanished. Amid the confusion, theories began to spread among the onlookers. Some speculated that the child had been hit and dragged under the vehicle. Others swore they saw someone snatch him just before the trailer passed. Panic and fear rippled through the crowd as they debated what had happened. Back at the daycare, Miss Grace finally returned to the room, oblivious to the chaos outside. It wasn't until she noticed Collins's empty mat that reality set in. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. "Collins!" she called out, her voice trembling. When she rushed to the gate and saw the growing crowd on the road, her knees buckled. The commotion outside grew louder, but for Miss Grace, the world went silent. Her negligence had set off a chain of events that would change everything. Raymond sat in his office, staring blankly at his laptop screen. The numbers on the spreadsheet blurred as his mind wandered to the pile of unfinished tasks waiting for him. His phone buzzed, jolting him from his thoughts. It was Brenda. He frowned, wondering why she was calling during office hours. "Hello?" he answered. "Raymond, have you picked Collins yet?" Her voice sounded hurried, slightly irritated. Raymond leaned back in his chair, confused. "What do you mean? I thought you were picking him up today." There was a long pause. "Raymond, I didn't. I thought you were handling it." His heart sank. "Wait, what? You're joking, right?" Please tell me you're joking. I'm not joking, Brenda snapped, panic creeping into her voice. You mean Collins is still at the daycare? Raymond shot out of his chair, grabbing his car keys. I'm on my way there now, he said, already heading for the door. Brenda, overwhelmed with guilt, left her meeting without an explanation. As she drove frantically toward Little Steps Daycare, a sinking feeling weighed on her chest. They had never left Collins unattended like this. What kind of parents forget their own child? When Raymond and Brenda arrived at the daycare almost simultaneously, they were greeted by the sight of chaos. A small crowd had gathered near the gate, whispering and pointing toward the main road. The couple pushed through the crowd, their anxiety mounting with each passing second. Inside the daycare, Miss Grace sat on a small stool, her face buried in her hands. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she muttered, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. Raymond's patience snapped. Where is my son? He bellowed, his voice echoing through the room. Miss Grace looked up, her expression filled with dread. I don't know, she stammered. I stepped out for just a moment. I didn't see him leave. Brenda gasped, clutching her chest. You lost my baby? How could you let this happen? Miss Grace, trembling, tried to explain. He was here. He was just here. But then Where is he now? Raymond interrupted, his face flushed with anger. A bystander outside called out. There was a baby on the road earlier. I saw a trailer swerving to avoid him. Brenda felt the blood drain from her face. What happened to him? Another voice chimed in. Some say the trailer hit him. Others think someone grabbed him. Nobody really knows. Raymond staggered backward, his mind racing. No, this can't be happening, he muttered under his breath. Brenda clung to his arm, tears streaming down her face. We have to find him, Raymond. We have to find our baby. At that moment, a police officer approached, having been called to the scene by concerned onlookers. We'll need you to file a missing child report, he said calmly, though his eyes betrayed the urgency of the situation. Raymond and Brenda were led to the police station, their minds in a fog of guilt and fear. As they recounted the events, the reality of their negligence became painfully clear. They had both assumed the other would take care of Collins, but in doing so, they had failed their son. The officer reassured them that they would do everything possible to find Collins. But as Raymond and Brenda left the station, the weight of uncertainty loomed over them. Where was their son? Was he safe? That night, the story of Collins's disappearance spread across social media, with local news stations picking it up. Pictures of the smiling toddler flashed across TV screens, accompanied by the hashtag #FindCollins. Yet the growing attention only fueled more speculation. Conspiracy theories erupted online, with some accusing the parents of negligence and others suggesting ritualists had targeted Collins. A few even speculated that the daycare was complicit in his disappearance. The night brought no solace to Raymond and Brenda as they sat in their living room, their eyes fixed on Collins's framed photograph. His innocent smile seemed to mock their growing fear. Calls to friends, extended family, and neighbors had yielded nothing but sympathy and prayers. Exhaustion and guilt weighed heavily on them, but they dared not rest. Every second felt like a countdown to an unknown fate. Suddenly, Raymond's phone rang. He snatched it up instantly, his voice trembling. Hello, a deep, gravelly voice answered. If you want to see your son again, you'll follow my instructions. Raymond froze, his heart pounding. Collins? You have Collins? Is he safe? Safe for now, the voice replied coldly. But if you want him to stay that way, you'll pay us 5 million Nira by tomorrow evening. No police, no tricks, or you'll regret it. Brenda, seeing the terror on Raymond's face, grabbed his arm. What is it? Is it Collins? Raymond covered the receiver and whispered, Someone's asking for ransom. Then turning his attention back to the caller, he stammered, I'll get the money. Please don't hurt my son. The line went dead. For a moment, silence engulfed the room. Then Brenda's voice broke through. We have to tell the police, she said urgently. No, Raymond snapped, pacing the room. They said no police. If we report this, they might. He couldn't bring himself to finish the sentence. Instead, the couple scrambled to gather the money. Raymond made calls to withdraw from his savings, while Brenda contacted her brother, who agreed to loan them the rest. Every second of preparation felt agonizingly slow, their desperation mounting with every delay. By the following afternoon, they had managed to assemble the 5 million naira. The instructions came via another anonymous call. Leave the money in an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. Raymond and Brenda drove to the location, their nerves frayed. The warehouse was desolate, its broken windows and graffiti-covered walls giving it an eerie feel. Raymond placed the bag of cash on the floor, exactly as instructed, and the couple waited in their car, hoping for a sign that Collins was nearby. Minutes turned into hours. No one came. "Something's wrong," Brenda whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Why haven't they contacted us?" Raymond clenched the steering wheel, his jaw tight. "I don't know. Let's give it more time." Finally, Raymond's phone buzzed again. He answered immediately. "Where's my son?" Laughter erupted on the other end of the line. "Your son? What son? We don't have your child. Thanks for the money, though." "What?" Raymond shouted, his voice echoing in the empty warehouse. "You lied. You—" The line disconnected. Raymond slammed his phone onto the dashboard, his face a mask of fury and despair. Brenda's sobs filled the car. "What kind of monsters would do this? What if Colin's really gone, Raymond?" Raymond took her hand, his own tears threatening to spill. "Don't say that. He's out there. He has to be." The realization that they had been scammed cut deep, but it wasn't just the loss of money that stung. It was the crushing weight of another dead end. Returning to the police station with this new development, Raymond and Brenda could only hope that the authorities would find a lead soon. Meanwhile, the real mystery of Collins's whereabouts remained unsolved, as the city's underbelly buzzed with activity. Somewhere hidden in plain sight, the truth about Collins waited to be uncovered. But for now, Raymond and Brenda were left with nothing but anguish and a deepening sense of dread. Miss Grace sat alone in her dimly lit apartment, the sound of her phone vibrating incessantly against the wooden table. She didn't dare answer it. News of Collins's disappearance had spread rapidly, and her name was being dragged through the mud. Parents from the daycare, former colleagues, and even friends bombarded her with calls. But what could she say? How could she explain that her negligence might have cost a child his life? Desperation clawed at her as she paced the small room. Her thoughts raced, recalling the moment she had stepped out of the daycare to take Noah's call. "It was just a few minutes," she whispered to herself, wringing her hands. "Just a few minutes." But deep down, she knew it wasn't just about those few minutes. Her track record told a different story, a history of carelessness and poor judgment that had followed her for years. At the police station, Raymond and Brenda sat with the lead investigator, reviewing every detail of what had happened at the daycare. One officer pulled out a file and hesitated before speaking. "There's something you should know about Miss Grace." "What?" Raymond asked sharply, his patience wearing thin. The officer slid a document across the table. "Miss Grace was terminated from her previous job at another daycare center. The reason listed is gross negligence. She had lost a child under her care once before, though that case ended with the child being found unharmed." Brenda gasped. "Why would anyone rehire her after that?" The officer shrugged. "It happens. These things aren't always reported to the right authorities. But this isn't her first incident." Raymond's jaw tightened. "So, this woman was a ticking time bomb, and no one thought to warn us?" The officer nodded grimly. "It gets worse. Her current employment was arranged through a recommendation from her boyfriend, Noah. While the couple reeled from the revelation, Miss Grace was frantically trying to contact Noah. He had been ignoring her calls since the incident, and she was beginning to panic. She finally dialed a different number, one of his known associates. "Where is Noah?" she demanded. The voice on the other end chuckled. "Grace, you're in trouble, aren't you? I told you to leave that boy alone. He's not good for you." "What do you mean? I need his help. He has connections. He can fix this." "Fix this?" The man scoffed. "You think Noah's going to risk himself for you? He's been using you, Grace. Do you even know who he really works for?" Grace froze. "What are you talking about?" "Let's just say he's not just a phone repair guy. He's got ties to some nasty people. And if this missing kid is tied to him in any way, you'd better start praying." Miss Grace's heart sank. She had always known Noah was secretive, but she never imagined he might be involved in something criminal. And now his shady dealings threatened to pull her deeper into the nightmare. As the investigation deepened, the police received a tip about Noah's connections to a suspected child trafficking ring. Raymond and Brenda were brought in for an update. "We believe Noah may have information about Collins's disappearance," the officer explained. "It's possible he or someone in his network exploited Miss Grace's negligence to take the child." Brenda's hands shook. "So you're saying my son could have been sold?" "We don't know yet," the officer reassured her. "But we're tracking Noah. He might be the key to finding Collins." Meanwhile, Miss Grace, realizing how deeply entangled she had become, packed a small bag and fled her apartment. She couldn't face the parents, the authorities, or the mounting guilt. Her plan was to hide in a remote town until the chaos subsided. But guilt gnawed at her. She replayed Collins's disappearance over and over in her mind, questioning every decision she had made. She thought about Noah's influence over her life and how her own carelessness had led to this moment. Before leaving, she scribbled a note and left it on the table. "I didn't mean for this to happen. I'm sorry." Raymond and Brenda, now armed with the truth about Miss Grace's negligence and Noah's possible involvement, felt the weight of their situation deepen. While they had initially blamed themselves for Collins' disappearance, the new revelations turned their anger outward. "She knew she was unfit for this job," Raymond spat as they drove home from the police station. "She had no business being around children." "But it's not just her," Brenda replied, her voice trembling. "If Noah had anything to do with this, if he's part of some trafficking ring—" "Raymond, what if we never see Collins again?" Raymond gripped the steering wheel tighter. "We will find him," he said firmly, though his own voice betrayed his doubt. "We have to." The weight of Collins's disappearance bore down heavily on Raymond. But it wasn't just the fear of losing his son that haunted him. It was a secret he had buried deep, a betrayal that now threatened to surface in the worst way possible. Months before Collins' disappearance, Raymond had been drawn into a dangerous liaison with a colleague at his office, Ngozi. What started as late nights working on a joint project had quickly turned into flirtatious conversations, and eventually an affair. Though guilt gnawed at him even then, he had rationalized it, telling himself that Brenda had been too preoccupied with her career to notice him. Raymond had ended the affair shortly after Collins' first birthday, overcome by shame and a desire to focus on his family. But the damage was done. Ngozi had warned him that if he ever tried to cut her off completely, she would expose him to Brenda. The affair had left Raymond paranoid. He began to fear that Brenda, if she ever found out, would use it against him in a custody battle if their marriage ever fell apart. The thought of losing Collins had consumed him even before this tragedy struck. Now that fear had taken on a new, horrifying reality. As the days dragged on with no sign of Collins, Raymond found himself unable to sleep. Brenda would pace the house or sit crying in the living room, clutching Collins's baby blanket, while Raymond retreated into the study, consumed by his thoughts. One night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Raymond sat in the dark, staring at a photo of his family on his desk. Collins's chubby cheeks and bright smile stared back at him, a painful reminder of what he might never see again. "This is my fault," he whispered to himself. His mind raced through all the what-ifs. What if he had been a better husband? What if he had spent more time at home instead of prioritizing work? And Ngozi? Brenda's voice broke the silence as she appeared in the doorway. "Raymond, are you okay?" He quickly wiped his eyes. "Yeah, I'm just thinking." "You haven't said much since this started," she said, her voice tinged with frustration and sadness. "We're supposed to be in this together, but it feels like you're somewhere else." Raymond wanted to tell her the truth, to confess everything, the affair, his guilt, his fears, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Not now, not when she was already carrying so much pain. Unable to hold it in any longer, Raymond turned to his best friend Cole for advice. Over drinks at Cole's house, he finally broke down. "I don't know if I can face her," Raymond admitted, his voice shaking. "I had an affair. It was a mistake, but it happened. And now, With Collins gone, I feel like it's karma, like I don't deserve to have him back. Cole stared at him in disbelief. Raymond, you can't think like that. What happened with Ngozi was wrong, but that doesn't mean you deserve this. Nobody does. You don't understand, Raymond said, his head in his hands. I've been so paranoid about losing Collins, I even thought about framing Brenda as an unfit mother, just in case. Framing her? Cole asked, horrified. Are you hearing yourself? That's your wife, the mother of your child. I know, Raymond said, his voice barely a whisper. I know how terrible it sounds. I never went through with it, but I thought about it. And now it's like the universe is punishing me for even considering it. Cole placed a hand on Raymond's shoulder. Listen to me. If you want to make this right, you need to focus on finding Collins. Nothing else matters right now. Leave the past in the past. Back at home, Raymond's internal struggle began to show. His silence and distracted behavior only deepened the rift between him and Brenda. One morning after another sleepless night, she confronted him. What is it, Raymond? She demanded. You've been acting strange since this happened. I feel like you're hiding something from me. Raymond hesitated, his throat tightening. He wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he deflected. I'm just stressed, Brenda. I miss Collins, that's all. But Brenda wasn't convinced. We're both stressed, Raymond, but I'm here fighting for our son while you seem like you've already given up. Her words stung, but Raymond said nothing. He knew she was right in some ways. His guilt had consumed him to the point where he could barely function. But he also knew that telling her the truth now would only break her further. Raymond's secret came to a head when Ngozi, the woman he had ended the affair with, called him unexpectedly. I heard about your son, she said softly. I'm so sorry, Raymond. What do you want, Ngozi? Raymond asked, his voice cold. I just wanted to help, she replied. If there's anything I can do. There's nothing, Raymond cut her off. This is my family's problem, not yours. But the call left him shaken. For the first time, he realized that if Ngozi ever decided to reveal their past, it could destroy whatever fragile bond he had left with Brenda. That night, as he lay awake beside his sleeping wife, Raymond made a silent vow. If they found Collins, he would confess everything. He would take responsibility for his mistakes, no matter the cost. But until that day came, he would do whatever it took to bring his son home. On the day Collins crawled to the main road, the towering figure of Ibrahim, a seasoned truck driver, sat in a makeshift chair outside a rural clinic, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He had been on the road for decades, weaving his massive truck through the chaotic Lagos traffic. Yet nothing had shaken him as much as what happened that fateful day. Ibrahim's trailer had been fully loaded with cement bags as he approached the busy Lagos intersection. The traffic was its usual madness, with cars darting in and out of lanes and pedestrians dangerously close to the road. But then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw something that didn't belong. A small, crawling figure heading straight for the road. His heart dropped. A baby? He thought, disbelief flooding his mind. In an instant, Ibrahim slammed his horn and yanked the steering wheel hard to the right, sending his trailer screeching off course. The weight of the cargo made the vehicle sway dangerously, nearly tipping over. He felt his pulse pounding as he braced for the worst, expecting to hear the sickening thud of the truck hitting the child. Instead, there was silence. When the trailer finally came to a halt, dust filled the air, and people screamed in panic. Ibrahim leapt from his cab and rushed to the spot where the child had been. But to his astonishment, the baby wasn't there. I saw him, someone in the crowd shouted. He was right there. Others speculated that the child must have been dragged under the truck or snatched away in the commotion. But Ibrahim's instincts told him differently. He glanced around and noticed a faint trail of dust leading toward a drainage ditch by the side of the road. Following his gut, Ibrahim moved quickly toward the ditch. There, lying on the soft mud, was the baby, crying but miraculously unharmed. He scooped the child up in his massive arms, his heart pounding as he cradled the tiny figure. The baby's cries were weak but steady, a sign of life that filled Ibrahim with a mixture of relief and panic. Whose child is this? He called out, but the crowd had grown chaotic, and no one could answer. Ibrahim's mind raced. Handing the baby over to someone in the crowd felt too risky. What if they were kidnappers or worse? He made a split-second decision. "I'll take him somewhere safe," he muttered to himself, heading back to his truck with the child in his arms. Ibrahim's decision to take Collins wasn't just about protecting the baby. It was deeply personal. Years ago, Ibrahim had lost his own family in a tragic car accident caused by reckless driving. His wife and young daughter had been killed instantly, leaving him a broken man. The pain of their loss had driven him to become a driver himself, vowing to be one of the few on Nigerian roads who valued safety above all else. Seeing Collins that day had triggered something in him, a need to save the child that mirrored his helplessness when he couldn't save his own daughter. But now that he had the baby, he wasn't sure what to do next. With no clear plan, Ibrahim drove out of Lagos, heading to a rural area where he knew of a small clinic run by an old friend. The clinic was understaffed and underfunded, but it was quiet and safe, far from the chaos of the city. When he arrived, he handed Collins over to the nurses, explaining that he had found the child abandoned near the road. "He needs rest," one of the nurses said, checking Collins for injuries. "But he seems fine." Ibrahim felt a wave of relief but also guilt. He knew he should contact the authorities or find the parents, but something held him back. The memory of his own loss weighed heavily on him, and a part of him feared that the parents who had lost track of Collins didn't deserve him back. "I'll stay here with him," Ibrahim told the nurses, "at least until I figure out what to do." As the days passed, Ibrahim found himself growing attached to Collins. The child's innocent smile and curious eyes reminded him of his own daughter, and he began to entertain the dangerous thought of keeping him. But his conscience nagged at him. He knew that somewhere, Collins's parents were likely desperate in searching for him. At the same time, he couldn't shake the anger he felt toward them for being so careless. How could anyone let a baby end up on a busy road? Ibrahim's old friend, Dr. Muhammad, tried to reason with him. "You can't keep this child, Ibrahim," Muhammad said gently. "He has a family out there. Keeping him is not the answer." "What if his family doesn't deserve him?" Ibrahim countered, his voice heavy with emotion. "What if they're the reason he was on that road in the first place?" Dr. Muhammad placed a hand on his shoulder. "Even if that's true, it's not for you to decide. This boy has a future that doesn't belong to you." One evening, as Ibrahim sat outside the clinic watching the sunset, Collins reached out and grabbed his finger. The simple gesture brought tears to Ibrahim's eyes. He realized then that keeping Collins wasn't the right thing to do. No matter how much he wanted to protect the boy, he couldn't let his own pain cloud his judgment. The next morning, Ibrahim made a decision. He would contact someone who could reconnect Collins with his parents. But before he could act, news of Collins's disappearance reached the clinic through a visitor who recognized the boy's photo on social media. "Ibrahim," Dr. Muhammad said urgently, showing him the news on his phone. "This child's parents are looking for him. They're desperate." Ibrahim's hands trembled as he stared at the image of Raymond and Brenda pleading for their son. The time had come to set things right, but the road to doing so would be fraught with emotional challenges for both him and the grieving parents. Raymond and Brenda found themselves caught in the crosshairs of public opinion. While some sympathized with their plight, others weren't as forgiving. "How do two parents forget their own child?" a TV host questioned during a heated panel discussion. "This isn't just the daycare's fault. It's a failure of basic parenting." Brenda watched the coverage from their living room, tears streaming down her face. "They're making us look like monsters," she whispered. Raymond, pacing back and forth, clenched his fists. "We can't worry about what people are saying. We need to focus on finding Collins." But the criticism wasn't limited to strangers. Extended family members, particularly Raymond's stern aunt, began making pointed remarks. "This is why I always told you two to slow down," she said over the phone. "Career is important, but your child should come first." Brenda hung up, unable to bear the weight of the accusations. She already blamed herself. Hearing it from others only deepened her anguish. Social media added fuel to the fire, with users sharing supposed sightings of Collins in markets, parks, and even neighboring states. Each new post brought a flicker of hope that was quickly extinguished when the leads turned out to be false. One particularly cruel hoax involved a photo of a similar-looking child posted online, claiming he had been found. Raymond and Brenda, desperate for answers, rushed to the location only to discover it was a sick joke. "This is too much," Brenda sobbed in the car after another fruitless search. "I can't take this anymore, Raymond. It's like the whole world is mocking us." Amid the chaos, a new piece of information surfaced. A vendor near the road where the incident occurred remembered seeing a man in a truck carrying a child shortly after the commotion. "He was holding the baby like he was protecting him," the vendor told police. "I thought he might be the father." The lead reignited the investigation, with authorities working to trace the truck and its driver. Raymond and Brenda clung to the news like a lifeline, praying it would finally bring them closer to Collins. The days stretched into a suffocating blur of anxiety and helplessness for Raymond and Brenda. The police's progress was painfully slow, and every lead seemed to end in disappointment. The tip about the trailer driver had given them a sliver of hope. But as time passed, that hope began to wane. For Brenda, the thought of her son out there, possibly scared and alone, gnawed at her soul. She couldn't sit and wait any longer. Frustrated with the slow pace of the investigation, Brenda contacted Mr. Edward, a private investigator known for his resourcefulness. Edward agreed to help, sifting through the chaotic web of rumors and dead ends surrounding Collins' disappearance. He spent days interviewing witnesses, reviewing CCTV footage, and following up on tips. Finally, Edward uncovered a critical clue. A witness in a neighboring village had seen a truck driver carrying a baby into a small rural clinic. The driver, described as a tall, middle-aged man with a worn face, matched the description of Ibrahim, the trailer driver suspected to have been involved in Collins's disappearance. Edward shared the information with Brenda during a late-night meeting. "The clinic is in a remote area, about 3 hours from Lagos," he explained. "It's run by a doctor who knows the driver personally. If this lead checks out, it could be the break we've been waiting for." Brenda didn't hesitate. "I'm going there," she declared. Her tone left no room for argument. "Brenda, wait," Edward cautioned. "This could be dangerous. You don't know who this driver is or why he took Collins. Let the police handle it." But Brenda's resolve was unshakable. "The police have done nothing but waste time," she said, her voice quivering with a mix of anger and desperation. "That's my baby out there, and I'm not sitting around while someone else decides his fate." When she told Raymond about her plan, he was torn. "Brenda, I understand how you feel, but this is reckless. What if something happens to you?" "Something is already happening to me, Raymond," she replied, tears brimming in her eyes. "I've lost my son. I can't lose another day. I need to do this. For him." Unable to change her mind, Raymond reluctantly agreed to let her go, promising to stay in touch and alert the police if she didn't return by morning. Brenda left before dawn, driving through the dark, winding roads that led to the rural village. The journey was fraught with challenges. Heavy rain reduced visibility, and the rough terrain made her progress slow. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with possibilities. What if this lead was another dead end? What if it wasn't Collins? Despite her fears, she pressed on, fueled by the thought of holding her son again. As she approached the clinic, the faint glow of its lights appeared in the distance. Her heart pounded as she parked and stepped out into the cool, damp air. The clinic was modest, its walls weathered and its sign barely legible. Brenda hesitated for a moment, gathering her courage before walking inside. Inside the clinic, Brenda was greeted by the kind but weary face of Dr. Mohammed, the clinic's head physician. He listened patiently as she explained her story, showing him photos of Collins and pleading for information. "Ibrahim brought a baby here a few days ago," Mohammed admitted, "but he didn't say much. He seemed protective of the child." Brenda's heart leapt. "Where is the baby now? Is he here?" Mohammed hesitated. "Yes, he's here, but Ibrahim didn't want anyone to know. He's been staying in the staff quarters, keeping the boy close. He believes he's protecting him." "Protecting him from what?" Brenda asked, her voice breaking. "He lost his family years ago," Mohammed explained. "I think he sees your son as a second chance to save someone. He's not a bad man, just a broken one." Before Mohammed could say more, the door to the staff quarters opened, and Ibrahim stepped out, holding Collins. The sight of her son in the driver's arms brought a gasp to Brenda's lips. Collins, though thinner than she remembered, looked unharmed. His wide eyes stared at her curiously, as if trying to place the face before him. Brenda took a cautious step forward. That's my son, she said softly, her voice trembling. Please, give him back to me. Ibrahim's grip on Collins tightened. You let him crawl onto a busy road, he said, his voice laced with pain and accusation. What kind of parents do that? Brenda fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. But I love him. He's my whole world. Please don't punish him for what I did. He belongs with us. Ibrahim looked down at Collins, then back at Brenda. His expression softened, the conflict in his eyes evident. He had grown attached to the boy, but deep down he knew Brenda was right. After what felt like an eternity, Ibrahim knelt down and gently placed Collins in her arms. Take care of him, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Don't let anything happen to him. Brenda clutched her son tightly, sobbing as relief and joy washed over her. Thank you, she whispered. The journey back to Lagos was surreal. Collins slept peacefully in the back seat, oblivious to the turmoil that had surrounded him. Brenda glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her heart swelling with gratitude and determination. She vowed never to let anything come between her and her son again. When they arrived home, Raymond ran out to meet them, his face lighting up at the sight of Collins. The family embraced, their reunion a mixture of tears and laughter. For the first time in days, they felt whole again. But the journey wasn't over. There were questions to answer, apologies to make, and wounds to heal. Yet in that moment, with Collins safely back in their arms, nothing else mattered.